Om Hridaya Kamala Madhye Rachitam Nirvikalpam Sada Sada Kila Bedati Kameka Swarupam Prakriti Vikirti Shunyam Nityamananda Murtim Vimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajama Nirupamamati Sukshmam Nishprapancham Nirhiham Gagana Sadrishamisham Sarva Bhutadivasam Triguna Rahita Satchit Brahmarupam Varenyam Vimala Paramahamsam Ramakrishnam Bhajamaha Vitaritum avatirnam jnana bhakti prashanti Pranaya galata chittam jiva dukkha sahishnum Dritasaja samadhim jinmayam komalangam Vimala paramahamsam Ramakrishnam bhajamaha. Meditation on Sri Ramakrishna. This knower of Brahman, ever established in his own nature, full of wisdom, self-possessed and self-lighted, eternal, the very image of that Brahman who is pure bliss, shining ceaselessly in the lotus of the heart, one alone and without parts, pure and still. This Ramakrishna, Paramatma Supreme, we adore. Subtle, fine and luminous, not even the shadow of the gross can ever reach him, for his purity is without parallel. Untouched by Maya's webs of deceit, beyond the dark rivers of time and desire, vast as the sky, this Supreme Lord, Ramakrishna, the very essence of Brahman as existence and light, this Ramakrishna, Paramatman Supreme, we adore. Saturated with divine consciousness, his home is in all. He hears every cry. He knows every pain. Under the weight of its compassion, his heart can deny the needs of none. Born to raise the world with teachings of knowledge, love, and peace, to bring mankind fresh songs of joy, this certain refuge of all, this Ramakrishna, Paramahamsa, Paramatman Supreme, we adore. So we will do another reading of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And today we are beginning just after the beginning of the chapter called The Advice to Householders. And I'm beginning on page 112 of this particular copy of Ramakrishna's Gospel. But as you know, when I do this, I've been trying to find somewhere a little description of Ramakrishna, either dancing or in samadhi or something. And I like to collect those and then give a little description at the beginning so that we can kind of meditate on him while we are hearing what he taught to his disciples. So in one place, Mother describes her time at Dakshineswar, and she said, I then felt as if a picture of bliss was kept in my heart. It was with me then. It's very difficult to convey an idea of this experience to others. What a unique man he was. How many minds he illuminated. What unceasing bliss he radiated. Day and night his room echoed and re-echoed with laughter, stories, talk, and music. The master sang, and I would listen hour after hour, standing behind the screen of the Nahabat. When the singing was over, I saluted him with folded hands. What joyous days we passed through. People poured in day and night, and there was no end to spiritual talk. How happy we were there. How many people of different temperaments used to come to him. Dakshineswar at that time appeared to us as a mart of bliss. I always saw a smile on his face in his ecstatic mood. I have seen him smile in all the states of samadhi. So here's one description, and here is another one. Ramakrishna was an ocean of joy. One Brahmo Samaj devotee met him once, and he describes his face as being filled with joy, like an overripe melon that has fallen onto the ground and split open. So his face radiated joy. Mother said, I never saw him sad, and she also said when he lived near him, she always felt as though a pitcher of bliss was overflowing in her heart. So there's a couple of thoughts on Ramakrishna that we can try to visualize as we're hearing his words. So this particular section starts with Thursday, October 24th, Thursday, August 24th, 1882. The master was talking to Hazra on the long northeastern veranda of his room when M arrived, and he saluted the master reverentially. Just a little comment. Those of you who've been to Dakshineswar and seen his room, you can picture his room too, and how Holy Mother, who she said was always listening and on the other side, it's just across a little area where the Nahabad is and where the screen was behind which she was listening to the teachings that he gave also. Master, I should like to visit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar a few times more. The painter first draws the general outline, and then he puts in the details and the colors at his leisure. The molder first makes the image out of clay, and then he plasters it and gives it a coat of whitewash, and last of all, paints it with a brush. All these steps must be taken successively. Vidyasagar is fully ready, but his inner stuff is covered with a thin layer. He's now engaged in doing good works, but he doesn't know what is within himself. God is hidden within him. God dwells within us. If we know that, one feels like giving up all activities and praying to God with a yearning soul. He once asked Vidyasagar, if God appears to you, will you ask him to build more hospitals? So he approved of doing good work to other people, but what he really wants is for the disciples to become spiritually awakened. So the master talked with M, now standing, now pacing up and down the long veranda. Master, a little spiritual discipline is necessary in order to know what lies within. M, is it necessary to practice discipline all through life? Master, no, but one must be up and doing at the beginning. After that, one need not work hard. The helmsman stands up and clutches the rudder firmly as long as the boat is passing through the waves, storms, high wind, or around the curves of a river. But when he relaxes after steering through them, as soon as the boat passes the curves, the helmsman feels a favorable wind, and he sits comfortably, and he just touches the rudder. Next, he prepares to unfurl the sail, and he gets ready for a smoke. Likewise, the aspirant enjoys peace and calm after passing the waves and storms of lust and greed. Some are born with the characteristics of a yogi, but they too have to be careful. It is woman and gold, lust and greed alone that is the obstacle. It makes them deviate from the path of yoga and drags them into worldliness. Perhaps they have some desire for enjoyment. After fulfilling their desire, they again direct their mind to God and thus recover their former state of mind, fit for the practice of yoga. Have you ever seen the spring trap for a fish called the sutkakal? No, sir, I've never seen it. Master, they use it in our part of the country. One end of a bamboo pole is fastened to the ground, and the other end is bent over with a catch. And from this end, there's a line, and it hangs over the water, and the bait's tied to the hook. And when the fish swallows the bait, suddenly the bamboo pole will jump up and regain its upright position. Again, take a pair of scales. For example, if a weight is placed on one side, the lower needle moves away from the upper one. The lower needle is the mind, and the upper one is God. The meeting of the two is yoga. Unless the mind becomes steady, there cannot be yoga. It is the wind of worldliness that always disturbs the mind, which may be likened to a candle flame. If that flame doesn't move at all, then one is said to have attained yoga. Woman and gold, lust and greed alone is the obstacle to yoga. Always analyze what you see. What is there in the body of a woman? Only such things as blood, flesh, fat, entrails, and the like. Why should one love such a body? There's some texts of Shankara and others where you're one of the practices is you're supposed to think of the, like all the skin's gone, and you're just seeing all this sort of grossness of what the body really is, that we think of as being so beautiful and so desirable. Sometimes I used to assume a rajasic mood in order to practice renunciation. Once I had the desire to put on a gold-embroidered cloth, wear a ring on my finger, and smoke a hubble-bubble with a long pipe. Mathur Babu procured all these things for me. I wore the gold-embroidered robe and said to myself after a while, "Mind, this is what is called a gold-embroidered robe." Then I took it off and threw it away. I couldn't stand the robe anymore. Again, I said to myself, "Mind, this is called a shawl, and this a ring, and this is smoking the hubble-bubble with a long pipe." I threw those things away. Once and for all, the desire to enjoy them never again arose in my mind. This is sort of interesting because you see how he combated his own any tendency that he had in his mind. It's also because, of course, he's teaching us, but he gives us a way to do it. Try it, and then renounce it. See its deficiencies and renounce it. This is what he does in this case. It was almost dusk. The master and M stood talking alone near the door on the southeast veranda. Master to M: "The mind of the yogi is always fixed on God, always absorbed in the self. You can recognize such a man by merely looking at him. His eyes are wide open, with an aimless look, like the eyes of a mother bird hatching her eggs. Her entire mind is fixed on the eggs, and there is a vacant look in her eyes. Can you show me such a picture?" M does procure such a picture, and we actually have a copy of it somewhere, of this mother bird sitting on a nest, brooding. As evening came on, the temples were lighted up. Sri Ramakrishna was seated on a small couch, meditating on the Divine Mother. Then he chanted the name of God. Incense was burnt in his room, where an oil lamp had been lighted. Sounds of conch shells and gongs came floating on the air as the evening worship began in the temples of Kali. The light of the moon flooded all the quarters. The master again spoke to M. "Master, perform your duties in an unselfish spirit. The work that Vidyasagar is engaged in is very good. Also try to perform your duties without desiring any results. M. Yes, sir. But may I know if one can realize God by performing one's duties? Can Rama and desire coexist? The other day I read in a Hindi couplet, where Rama is, there desire cannot be. Where desire is, there Rama cannot be. Master, all without exception perform work. Even to chant the name and glory of God is work, as is the meditation on the non-dualist on I am He. Breathing also is an activity. There is no way of renouncing work altogether. So do your work, but surrender the results to God. M. Sir, may I make an effort to earn more money? Master, it is permissible to do so to maintain a religious family. You may try to increase your income, but in an honest way. The goal of life is not earning of money, but the service of God. Money is not harmful if it is devoted to the service of God. M. How long should a man feel obligated to do his duty toward his wife and children? Master, as long as they feel pinched for food and clothing. But one need not take the responsibility of a son when he's able to support himself. When the young fledgling learns to pick its own food, its mother pecks it if it comes to her for food. M. How long must one do one's duty? Master, the blossom drops off when the fruit appears. One doesn't have to do one's duty after the attainment of God, nor does one feel like doing it then. If a drunkard takes too much liquor, he cannot retain consciousness. If he takes only 2 or 3 glasses, he can go on with his work. As you advance nearer and nearer to God, He will reduce your activities little by little. Have no fear. Finish the few duties you have at hand, and then you will have peace. When the mistress of the house goes to bathe after finishing her cooking and other household duties, she won't come back, however you may shout after her. M. Sir, what is the meaning of the realization of God? What do you mean by God vision? How does one attain it? Master, according to the Vaishnavas, the aspirant and the seers of God may be divided into different groups. There are the Pravrajika, the Sadhaka, the Siddha, and the Siddha of the Siddhas. He who has just set foot on the path may be called a Pravartika. He may be called a sadhaka who has for some time been practicing spiritual disciplines such as worship, japa, meditation, and the chanting of God's name and glory. He may be called a siddha who has known from his inner experience that God exists. An analogy is given in the Vedanta to explain this. The master of the house is asleep in a darkened room. Someone is groping in the darkness to find him. He touches the couch and he says, "No, that's not him." He touches the window and says, "No, it's not he." He touches the door and says, "No, it's not he." This is known in the Vedanta as the process of neti-neti. Not this, not this. At last his hand touches the master's body and he exclaims, "Here he is." In other words, he's now conscious of the existence of the master. He's found him, but he doesn't yet know him intimately. There is another type, known as the Siddha of the Siddhas, the supremely perfect. It's quite a different thing when one talks to the master intimately, when one knows God very intimately through love and devotion. A siddha has undoubtedly attained God, but the supremely perfect has known God very intimately. But in order to realize God, one must assume one of these attitudes: Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, or Madhura. Shanta, the serene attitude. The rishis of olden times had this attitude toward God. They did not desire any worldly enjoyment. It's like the single-minded devotion of a wife to her husband. She knows that her husband's the embodiment of beauty and love, a veritable madhan. Dasya, the attitude of a servant toward his master. Hanuman had this attitude toward Rama. He felt the strength of a lion when he worked for Rama. A wife feels this mood also. She serves her husband with all her heart and soul. A mother also has a little of this attitude, as Yashoda had toward Krishna. Sakya, the attitude of friendship. Friends say to one another, "Come here and sit by me." Sridama and other friends sometimes fed Krishna with fruit, part of which they had already eaten, and sometimes they climbed on his shoulders. Vatsalya, the attitude of a mother toward her child. This was Yashoda's attitude toward Krishna. The wife, too, has a little of this. She feeds her husband with her very life blood, as it were. The mother feels happy only when the child has eaten to his heart's content. Yashoda would roam about with butter in her hand in order to feed Krishna. Mathur, the attitude of a woman toward her paramour. Radha had this attitude toward Krishna. The wife also feels it for her husband. This attitude includes all the other fours. M. When one sees God, does one see him with these eyes? God cannot be seen with these physical eyes. In the course of spiritual discipline, one gets a love body endowed with love eyes, love ears, and so on. One sees God with those love eyes. One hears the voice of God with those love ears. One even gets a sexual organ made of love. At these words, M burst out laughing. The master continued, unannoyed. With this love body, the soul communes with God. M became serious. Master, but this is not possible without intense love of God. One sees nothing but God everywhere when one loves him with great intensity. It's like a person with jaundice who sees everywhere yellow. Then one feels, I am verily he. A drunkard, deeply intoxicated, says, I am Kali. The gopis, intoxicated with love, exclaim, verily I am Krishna. One who thinks of God day and night beholds him everywhere. It's like a man seeing a flame on all sides after he's gazed fixedly at a flame for some time. But that isn't the real flame, flashed through M's mind. Ramakrishna, who could read a man's innermost thoughts, said, one doesn't lose consciousness by thinking of him who is spirit, all consciousness. Shivanath once remarked that on too much thinking about God, one confounds the brain. Thereupon I said to him, how can one become unconscious by thinking of consciousness? M. Yes, sir, I realize that. It isn't like thinking of an unreal object. How can a man lose his intelligence if he's always fixing his mind upon him, who is the very nature of eternal intelligence? Master, with pleasure, it is through God's grace that you understood that. The doubts of the mind will not disappear without his grace. Doubts do not disappear without self-realization. But when one need not fear anything if one has received the grace of God. It's rather easy for a child to stumble if he holds onto his father's hand, but there can be no such fear if the father holds the hand of the child. A man does not have to suffer anymore if God in his grace removes his doubts and reveals himself to him. But this grace descends upon him only after he has prayed to God with intense yearning of heart and practiced spiritual discipline. The mother feels compassion for her child when she sees him running about breathlessly. She's been hiding herself, but now she appears before the child. But why should God make us run about, thought M. Immediately, Sri Ramakrishna said, it is his will that we should run about a little. Then it is great fun. God has created the world in play, as it were. This is Mahamaya, the great illusion. Therefore, one must take refuge in the Divine Mother, the cosmic power itself. It is she who has bound us with the shackles of illusion. The realization of God is possible only when those shackles are severed. There's a song that goes something like, O Lord, why hast thou created this world? What joy impelled thee? From whence came this creation? The sun, the moon, and the stars. All this is the Lord himself in the divine bliss of play. The Master continued, one must propitiate the Divine Mother, the primal energy, in order to obtain God's grace. God himself is Mahamaya, who dilutes the world with her illusion and conjures up the magic of creation, preservation, and destruction. She has spread this veil of ignorance before our eyes. We can go into the inner chamber only when she lets us pass through the door. Living outside, we only see the outer objects, but not that eternal being. Existence, knowledge, bliss absolute. Therefore, it is stated in the Purana that the deities like Brahma praise Mahamaya for the destruction of the demons, Madhu and Kaitaba. Shakti alone is the root of the universe. That primal energy has two aspects, vidya and avidya. Avidya dilutes. Avidya conjures up woman in gold, which casts the spell. Vidya begets devotion, kindness, wisdom, and love, which lead one to God. This avidya must be propitiated, and that is the purpose of the rites of the Shakti worship. The devotee assumes various attitudes toward Shakti in order to propitiate her. The attitude of a handmaiden, a hero, or a child. A hero's attitude is to please her even as a man pleases a woman through intercourse. The worship of Shakti is extremely difficult. It is no joke. I passed 2 years as a handmaiden and companion of the Divine Mother, but now my natural attitude has always been that of a child toward its mother. I regard the breasts of any woman as those of my own mother. Women are, all of them, the veritable images of Shakti. In the northwest, India, the bride holds a knife in her hand at the time of marriage. In Bengal, a nut cutter. The meaning is that the bridegroom, with the help of the bride, who is the embodiment of the divine power, will sever the bondage of illusion. This is the heroic attitude. I never worshiped the Divine Mother that way. My attitude toward her is that of a child toward its mother. The bride is the very embodiment of Shakti. Haven't you noticed at the marriage ceremony how the groom sits behind like an idiot? But the bride, she's so bold. After attaining God, one forgets his external splendor, the glories of his creation. One doesn't think of God's glories after he sees him. The devotee, once immersed in God's bliss, doesn't calculate anymore about outer things. When I see Narendra, I don't need to ask him, what is your name? Where do you live? What is the time for such questions? Once a man asked Hanuman which day of the fortnight it was. Brother, said Hanuman, I don't know anything of the days of the week, or the fortnight, or the position of the stars. I think of Rama alone. So another day, October 16th, 1882. It was Monday, a few days before the Durga Puja, the festival of the Divine Mother. Ramakrishna was in a very happy state of mind, for Narendra was with him. Narendra had brought 2 or 3 young members of the Brahma Samaj to the temple garden. Besides these, Rakal, Ramlal, Hazra, and M were with the master. Narendra had had his midday meal with Sri Ramakrishna, and afterward a temporary bed was made on the floor of the master's room so the disciples might rest there. A mat was spread over which was placed a quilt covered with a white sheet. A few cushions and pillows completed the simple bed. Like a child, the master sat near Narendranath on the bed. He talked with the devotees with great delight. With a radiant smile lighting his face and eyes fixed on Narendra, he was giving them various spiritual teachings, interspersing these with incidents from his own life. Master, after I had experienced samadhi, my mind craved intensely to hear only about God. I would always search for places where they were reciting or explaining the sacred books, such as the Bhagavata, the Mahabharata, and the Adhyatma Ramayana. I used to go to Krishna Kishore's to hear him read the Adhyatma Ramayana. What tremendous faith Krishna Kishore had. Once, while at Vrindavan, he felt thirsty and went to a well, and near it he saw a man sitting. On being asked to draw a little water for him, the man said, I belong to a low caste, sir. You're a Brahmin. How can I draw water for you? Krishna Kishore said, take the name of Shiva. By repeating his holy name, you will make yourself pure. The low caste man did as he was told, and Krishna Kishore, orthodox Brahmin that he was, drank that water. What a tremendous faith. Once a holy man came to the bank of the Ganga and lived near the bathing ghat at Aridaha, not far from Dakshineswar. We thought of paying him a visit. I said to Haladari, Krishna Kishore and I are going to see a holy man. Will you come with us? Haladar replied, what is the use of seeing a mere human body which is no better than a cage of clay? Haladari was a student of the Gita and Vedanta philosophy, and therefore referred to the holy man as a mere cage of clay. I repeated this to Krishna Kishore. With great anger, he said, how impudent of Haladari to make such a remark. How can he ridicule a cage of clay, the body of a man who constantly thinks on God, who meditates on Rama, and has renounced all for the sake of spirit? He was so upset by Haladari's remarks that he would turn his face away from him whenever he met him in the temple garden, and he stopped speaking to him altogether. Once Krishna Kishore asked me, why have you cast off the sacred thread? In those days of God vision, I felt as if I were passing through a great storm of Ashwin, and everything was blown away from me. No trace of my old self was left. I lost all consciousness of the world. I could hardly keep my cloth on my body, not to speak of a sacred thread. I said to Krishna Kishore, you will understand when it happens to you and you become intoxicated with God as I was. And it actually came to pass. He too passed through a God-intoxicated state when he would repeat only the word Om and shut himself up alone in his room. His relatives thought he was actually mad, and they called in a physician. Ram Kaviraj of Natagore came to see him. Krishna Kishore said to the physician, "Cure me, sir, of my melody, if you please, but not of my Om." Everybody laughed. One day I went to see him, and I found him in a pensive mood. When I asked him about it, he said, "The tax collector was here. He threatened to dispose of my brass pots, my cups, my few utensils, if I didn't pay the tax, so I'm worried." I said, "But why should you worry about it? Let him take away your pots and pans. Let him arrest your body even. How will that affect you? For your nature is the nature of Ka." Narendra and the others laughed. He used to say to me that he was the spirit, all-pervading as the sky. He'd got that idea from the Adhyatma Ramayana, and I used to tease him now and then, addressing him as Ka. Therefore I said to him that day with a smile, "You are Ka. Taxes cannot move you." In that state of God intoxication, I used to speak out my mind to all. I was no respecter of persons. Even in a position, I was not afraid to speak the truth. One day, Jatindra came to the garden house of Jadu Malik. I was there too, and I asked him, "What's the duty of man? Isn't it our duty to think of God?" Jatindra replied, "We are worldly people. How is it possible for us to achieve liberation? Even King Yudhisthira had to have a vision of hell." This made me very angry, and I said to him, "What sort of man are you? All of the incidents of Yudhisthira's life, you remember only his seeing hell? You don't remember his truthfulness, his forbearance, his patience, his discrimination, his dispassion, his devotion to God?" I was about to say many more things when Hriday stopped my mouth. After a little while, Jatindra left the place, saying he had some other business to attend to. Many days later, I went with Captain to see Raja Surendra Tagore. As soon as I met him, I said, "I can't address you as Raja or by any such title, for I should be telling a lie." He talked to me for a few minutes, but even our conversation was interrupted by frequent visits from Europeans and others. A man of Rajasic temperament, Surendra was actually busy with many things. Jatindra, his elder brother, had been told of my coming, but he sent word that he had a pain in his throat and couldn't go out. One day, in that state of divine intoxication, I went to the bathing ghat on the Ganga at Bharanagore. There I saw Jaya Mukherjee repeating the name of God, but his mind was on something else. I went up to him and I slapped him twice on the cheeks. At one time, Rani Rasmani was staying in the temple garden. She came to the shrine of the Divine Mother, as she frequently did, when I worshipped Kali, and asked me to sing a song or two. On this occasion, while I was singing, I noticed she was sorting the flowers for worship, absent-mindedly. At once, I slapped her on the cheeks. She became quite embarrassed and sat there with folded hands. Alarmed by this state of mind myself, I said to my cousin Haladari, "Just see my nature. How can I get rid of it?" After praying to the Divine Mother for some time with great yearning, I was able to shake off this habit. When one gets into such a state of mind, one doesn't enjoy conversation, any conversation except that about God, and I used to weep when I heard people talk about worldly matters. When I accompanied Mathur Babu on a pilgrimage, we spent a few days in Benares at Raja Babu's house. One day I was seated in the drawing room with Mathur Babu, Raja Babu, and others, and hearing them talk about various worldly things, such as their business losses and so forth, I wept bitterly and said to the Divine Mother, "Mother, where have you brought me? I was much better off in the temple garden at Dakshineswar. Here I am in a place where I must hear about woman and gold, lust and greed. But at Dakshineswar I could avoid it." The Master asked the devotees, especially Narendra, to rest a while, and he himself lay down on a small couch. Late in the afternoon, Narendra sang. Rakal, Latu M, Hazra, and Priya, Narendra's Brahma friend, were all present. The singing was accompanied by drum. Meditate, O my mind, on the Lord Hari, the stainless one, pure spirit through and through. How peerless is the light that in him shines. How soul bewitching is his wondrous form. How dear is he to all his devotees. After this song, Narendra sang, "O when will dawn that blessed day, when he who is all God, all beauty, all truth, all good, will light the innermost shrine of my heart, when I shall sink at last, ever beholding him, into that ocean of delight. Lord, as infinite wisdom, thou enter my soul, and my unquiet mind, made speechless by thy sight, will find a haven at thy feet. In my heart's firmament, O Lord, thou wilt rise as blissful immortality. And as, when the Chakora beholds the rising moon, it sports about in very joy, so too I shall be filled with heavenly happiness when thou appearest to me. Thou one without a second, all peace, the King of kings. At thy beloved feet I shall renounce my life, and so at last shall gain life's goal. I shall enjoy the bliss of heaven while on earth. Where else is a boon so rare bestowed? When shall I see thy glory, pure and untouched by stain? As darkness flees from light, so will my darkest sins desert me at thy dawn's approach. Kindle in me, O Lord, the blazing fire of faith, to be the pole star of my life. O succor of the weak, fulfill my one desire. Then I shall bathe both day and night in the boundless bliss of thy love, and utterly forget myself, O Lord, attaining thee." Narendra sang again. With beaming face, chant the sweet name of God, till in your heart the nectar overflows. Drink it ceaselessly and share it with all. If ever your heart runs dry, parched by the flames of worldly desire, chant the sweet name of God, and heavenly love will moisten your arid soul. Be sure, O mind, you never forget to chant his holy name. When danger stares you in the face, call on him, your Father compassionate. With his name's thunder, snap the fetters of sin. Come, let us fulfill our heart's desires by drinking deep of everlasting joy, made one with him in love's pure ecstasy. Now Narendra and the devotees began to sing kirtan, accompanied by drums and cymbals. They moved around and around the Master's body as they sang. Immerse yourself forevermore in him who is pure knowledge and pure bliss. Next they sang, Oh, when will dawn for me that day of blessedness when he who is all good, all beauty, all truth will light the innermost shrine of my heart? At last Narendra himself was playing on the drums as he sang with the master full of joy. With beaming face, chant the sweet name of God. When the music was over, Sri Ramakrishna held Narendra in his arms for a long time and said, "You've made me so happy today." The floodgate of the master's heart was opened so wide that night that he could hardly contain himself for joy. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. Intoxicated with divine love, he paced along the veranda north of his room. Now and then he could be heard talking to the Divine Mother. Suddenly he said in an excited voice, What can you do to me?" Was the mother hinting that Maya was helpless before him, since he had the Divine Mother for his support? Narendra, M, and Priya were going to spend the night in the temple garden. This pleased the master highly, especially since Narendra would be with him. The Holy Mother, who was living in the Nahabad, had prepared a supper. Surendra bore the greater part of the master's expenses. The meal was ready, and the plates were set out in the southeast veranda of the master's room. Near the east door of his room, Narendra and the other devotees were gossiping. "Master, how do you find young men nowadays?" No, excuse me, it was Narendra. "How do you find the young men nowadays?" M. "They're not bad, but they don't receive any religious instruction." Narendra. "But from my experience, I feel they're going to the dogs. They smoke cigarettes, indulge in frivolous talk, enjoy foppishness, play truant, and do everything of that sort. I've even seen them visiting places of questionable repute." M. "I didn't notice such things during our student days." Narendra. "Perhaps you didn't mix with the students intimately. I've even seen them talking with people of immoral character. Perhaps they are on terms of intimacy with them." M. "It is strange indeed." Narendra. "I know that many of them form bad habits. It would be proper if the guardians of the boys and the authorities kept their eyes on these matters." They were talking thus when Sri Ramakrishna came to them and asked with a smile, "Well, what are you talking about?" Narendra. "I have been asking M about the boys of the schools. The conduct of students nowadays isn't all that it could be." The master became grave and said to M seriously, "This kind of conversation is not good. It isn't desirable to indulge in any talk, but talk of God. You are their senior, and you are intelligent. You should not have encouraged them to talk on such matters." Narendra was then about 19 years old, and M was about 28. Thus admonished, M felt embarrassed, and the others too fell silent. While the devotees were enjoying their meal, Sri Ramakrishna stood and watched them with intense delight. That night the master's joy was very great. After supper, the devotees rested on the mat spread on the floor of the master's room. They began to talk with him. It was indeed a mart of joy. The master asked Narendra to sing a song beginning with the lines, "In wisdom's firmament, the moon of love is rising full." Narendra sang, and the other devotees played the drums and cymbals. "In wisdom's firmament, the moon of love is rising full, and love's flood tide, in surging waves, is flowing everywhere. O Lord, how full of bliss thou art! Victory unto thee. On every side shine devotees like stars around the moon. Their friend, the Lord all-merciful, joyously plays with them. Behold, the gates of paradise today are open." The soft spring wind of the new day raises fresh waves of joy. Gently it carries to the earth the fragrance of God's love, till all the yogis, drunk with bliss, are lost in ecstasy. Upon the sea of the world unfolds the lotus of the new day, and there the mother sits, enshrined in blissful majesty. See how the bees are mad with joy, sipping the nectar there. Behold the mother's radiant face, which so enchants the heart and captures the universe. About her lotus feet, bands of ecstatic holy men are dancing in delight. What matchless loveliness is hers? What infinite content pervades her heart when she appears, O brother, says Prem Das. I humbly beg you, one and all, to sing the mother's praise. Master sang and danced, and the devotees danced with him. And when the song was over, the master walked up and down the northeast veranda where Hazra was seated with him. The master sat down there and asked a devotee, "Do you ever have dreams?" Devotee, "Yes, sir. The other day I dreamt a strange dream. I saw the whole world enveloped in water. There was water on all sides. A few boats were visible, but suddenly huge waves appeared and sank them. I was about to board a ship with a few others when I saw a Brahmin walking over that expanse of water. I asked him, 'How can you walk over the water?' The Brahmin said with a smile, 'Oh, there's no difficulty about that. There's a bridge under the water.' I said to him, 'Where are you going?' 'To Bhavanipur, the city of the Divine Mother,' he replied. 'Wait a little,' I cried. 'I shall accompany you.' Master, oh, I'm thrilled to hear that story. Devotee, the Brahmin said, 'I'm in a hurry. It will take some time to get out of the boat. Goodbye, remember the path and come after me.' Master, oh, my hair is standing on end. Please be initiated by a guru as soon as possible." Shortly before midnight, Narendra and other devotees lay down on a bed made on the floor in the master's room. At dawn, some of the devotees were up, and they saw the master, naked as a child, pacing up and down the room, repeating the names of the various gods and goddesses. His voice was sweet as nectar. Now he would look at the Ganges and now stop in front of the pictures hanging on the wall and bow down before them, chanting all the while the holy names in his sweet voice. He chanted, Veda, Purana, Tantra, Gita, Gayatri, Bhagavata, Bhakta, Bhagavan. Referring to the Gita, he repeated many times, Tagi, Tagi, Tagi. And now he would say, O Mother, thou art verily Brahman, and thou art verily Shakti. Thou art Purusha, and thou art Prakriti. Thou art Virat. Thou art the Absolute. Thou dost manifest thyself in the relative. Thou art verily the 24 cosmic principles. In the meantime, the morning service was begun in the temple of Kali and Radhakanta. Sounds of conch shells and cymbals were carried on the air. The devotees came outside the room and saw the priests and servants gathering flowers in the garden for the divine service in the temples. From the Nahabat floated the sweet melody of musical instruments, befitting the morning hours. Narendra and the other devotees finished their morning duties and came to the master. With a sweet smile on his lips, Sri Ramakrishna was standing on the northeast veranda, close up to his own room. Narendra, we noticed several sannyasis belonging to the sect of Nanak in the Panchavati. Master, yes, they arrived here yesterday. To Narendra, I'd like to see you all sitting together on the mat. As they sat there, the master looked at them with evident delight. He then began to talk with them. Narendra asked about spiritual discipline. Master, bhakti, love of God, is the essence of all spiritual discipline. Through love, one acquires renunciation and discrimination naturally. Narendra, isn't it true that the Tantra prescribes spiritual disciplines in the company of women? Master, that is not desirable. It's a very difficult path and often causes spiritual downfall. There are 3 such kinds of discipline. One may regard a woman as one's mistress, or look on oneself as her handmaid or a child. I look on woman as my mother. To look on oneself as her handmaid is also good, but it's extremely difficult to practice spiritual discipline looking on a woman as one's mistress. To regard oneself as a child is a very pure attitude. The sannyasis belonging to the sects of Nanak entered the room and greeted the master, saying, Om Narayanaya. Sri Ramakrishna asked them to sit down. Master, nothing is impossible for God. No one can describe his nature in words. Everything is possible for him. There lived in a certain place 2 yogis who were practicing discipline. The sage Narada was passing that way one day, and realizing who he was, one of the yogis said, You have just come from God himself. What is he doing now? And Narada replied, Oh, I saw him making camels and elephants pass through the eye of a needle. At this, the yogi said, Is that anything to wonder at? Everything is possible for God. But the other yogi said, What? Making elephants pass through the eye of a needle? Is that ever possible? You've never been to God's dwelling place. At 9 o'clock in the morning, while the master was sitting in his room, Mano Mohan arrived from Kanagar with some members of his family. In answer to Sri Ramakrishna's kind inquiries, Mano Mohan explained that he was taking them to Calcutta. The master said, Today is the first day of the Bengal month, with an inauspicious day for undertaking a journey. I hope everything will be well with you. With a smile, he began to talk of other matters. I think I'll stop here. It's a good stopping place. And we will do a chant, if I can find my chant. Yes, here it is. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is he still the same. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace.